Have you ever wondered why, even in a room full of people, you can feel completely alone? Why the praise of your friends, the affection of your partner, or the approval of your family never seems to quiet that quiet ache inside your chest? Have you ever stayed up late scrolling through messages, waiting for someone to reach out, and when they finally did, felt the warmth fade almost as soon as it came? And have you ever asked yourself the hardest question of all? What if no one comes? What if no one comes? One can heal this part of me. We live in a world that tells us healing comes from being seen, from being loved, from being chosen. But Buddhist wisdom offers a quiet, radical truth. The one who has been waiting to heal you is the one you already are. Tonight, I want to tell you a story not about falling in love with someone else, not about finding the perfect friend or teacher or guide, but about falling into yourself, about learning to sit in the quiet and find there the medicine you have been searching for. So stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you may no longer fear your loneliness. You may begin to see it as the doorway to the deepest peace of all. Sarah was 48, and on the surface, her life looked steady. She worked as a nurse in a busy city hospital, where she was known for her kindness, her sharp eye for detail, and the way she could calm even the most frightened patient with a few soft words. She was the one her co-workers turned to when their shifts felt too long, when the weight of suffering felt too heavy. She was the one her friends called late at night, when they needed comfort, advice, or simply someone to listen without judgment. And yet, when Sarah came home at the end of the day, the silence in her apartment seemed to wrap around her like a second skin. She would walk through the door, kick off her shoes, and the quiet would hit her with the same sharp ache every night. The kitchen light humming softly, the small stack of unopened mail on the counter, the television remote sitting on the arm of the couch, waiting for a hand to reach for it. She would stand there for a long moment, keys still in her hand, and feel it rising again. That ache, that small, persistent longing, she called it loneliness. But the truth was, it was something deeper. It wasn't just the absence of people. It was the absence of feeling truly whole inside her own skin. Most nights, Sarah distracted herself. She scrolled through her phone, checked social media, commented on old friends' posts, clicked through photos from vacations she barely remembered. She texted friends just to keep the thread alive, even when her heart wasn't in it. Some nights she went out for drinks after work, laughing a little too loudly at stories that didn't quite touch her, hoping that the noise of the world would quiet the noise inside. But always, inevitably, she came home, and the quiet was still there. There was a small, cracked teacup on her kitchen shelf. It had belonged to her grandmother, a woman she had loved deeply, a woman who had known how to sit still in her own company. As a child, Sarah would watch her grandmother drink tea in the mornings, soft sunlight on her face, a kind of quiet peace radiating from her. She never understood it back then, this ability to sit alone without reaching for distraction, without needing to be needed. The teacup had been cracked for years. Sarah kept meaning to repair it or throw it away, but something always stopped her. One night, after a long shift and an even longer silence, Sarah found herself standing in front of the shelf, fingers brushing over the small fracture in the porcelain. For the first time, she really looked at it. It wasn't even broken. It was still whole. It had survived. And in that moment, something inside Sarah softened. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the cracks in our lives are not where we fail, but where we are invited to let light in. The heart breaks open not to punish us, but to show us where we are still alive, Sarah sat down at her kitchen table, the teacup in her hands. She took a slow breath, felt the quiet around her, and instead of running from it, she leaned into it. She let the silence be loud. She let the ache in her chest be known. She did not reach for her phone. She did not turn on the TV. She just sat. And in that sitting, she felt something she had never expected. Relief. Relief from the exhausting task of performing happiness. Relief from the relentless chase of connection. Relief from the belief that she had to be whole only when someone else saw her as worthy. Buddhist teachings remind us that healing does not begin when we are fixed by another. It begins when we can stay present with our own discomfort, when we can sit with our wounds without needing them to vanish. That night, Sarah stayed up late, sitting at her table, the teacup beside her. She breathed. She watched the moon rise outside her window. She let the ache in her chest come and go like a wave she no longer needed to control. In the days that followed, something inside her began to change. She still went to work. She still laughed with her coworkers. She still answered her friends' late-night texts. But the difference was subtle and profound. She no longer believed they were the answer to her healing. She no longer believed her wholeness depended on someone else's love. She began to carve out time in her days just to sit. 10 minutes in the morning, watching the sun rise. 5 minutes in the afternoon, feeling her breath move in and out. A quiet moment at night, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. The cracked teacup beside her, its broken line now a soft, beautiful reminder. There was one afternoon, months later, when Sarah sat in the park on a bench under a wide oak tree. Children played nearby. Couples strolled past, hands intertwined. Dogs chased each other across the grass. And Sarah sat there, alone, watching it all. For the first time in years, the aloneness did not feel like a punishment. It felt like belonging. It felt like presence. She closed her eyes, felt the warmth of the sun on her skin, heard the soft murmur of life around her, and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, not because all her wounds had healed, but because she was no longer waiting to be saved. There's a Buddhist saying, you yourself, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Sarah understood now what her grandmother had known all those years ago, that the ability to sit with yourself, to befriend your own heart, is the beginning of true freedom. And from that freedom, everything else becomes a gift. Not a requirement, not a cure, a gift. The love of friends, the company of strangers, the laughter of children in a park. They no longer filled a hole. They simply added to a life already full. That evening, Sarah returned home. The teacup in her hand, she placed it on the kitchen shelf, ran her fingers over the small crack, and whispered quietly, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, not to any moment or memory, but to herself, for staying, for softening, for learning that healing was never about perfection. It was about presence. And as she moved through her quiet home, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the world hushed, Sarah felt something that surprised her again. Peace, the kind that does not depend on who comes or goes. The kind that rises from within, steady and true, like a song only she can hear. And in that peace, Sarah understood the heart of Buddhist wisdom, that to heal yourself, without needing anyone is not to walk alone, but to walk free. Free to love, free to give, free to be. The days moved on, as days always do. Sarah began to notice small things. Not the big cinematic moments that movies promise will change your life, but the quiet, almost invisible shifts that only become clear when you stop long enough to feel them. She found herself standing in front of the mirror in the morning, brushing her hair, and realizing she no longer filled the silence with background noise. No radio, no podcast, no television flickering in the other room, just her breath, the rhythm of the brush, the soft light spilling through the window. She noticed her apartment felt less like a place she was waiting to leave, and more like a place she was allowed to belong to. The couch became a spot for reading, not just collapsing. The kitchen became a space for cooking simple meals for herself, not just microwaving something to pass the time. But the most surprising change was in the way she began to see the cracked teacup. For years, that little cup had been a symbol of what was broken in her. Fragile, flawed, not quite worthy of display, but too sentimental to throw away. It sat there like a quiet reminder that there was something she should fix, something she should get around to repairing, something that wasn't quite whole. But now she saw it differently. One afternoon, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, the cup in her hand, sunlight warming the surface. She turned it slowly, watching the light catch the crack that ran along one side, and for the first time it struck her. The crack was not a wound. It was a story. It was where the cup had survived. It was where the cup had been tested and remained. Buddhist wisdom teaches that what we often call broken is sometimes where we are most alive. The crack is not the flaw. The crack is the record of endurance. Sarah ran her finger along the line, a soft smile playing at the corners of her mouth. How many years had she believed that she was too much or not enough, too sensitive, too independent, too messy inside? She had waited again and again for someone to come along and say the magic words, to heal the old wounds, to put the pieces back together. But the truth was simpler and harder. She had always been the one she was waiting for. That night, Sarah sat quietly on her couch, the apartment dark except for the soft glow of a lamp in the corner. She held the cup gently in her lap, the weight of it familiar, comforting. She closed her eyes and let the quiet come, not as punishment, not as absence, but as presence. The quiet became a kind of companion. The ache in her chest softened, not because it disappeared, but because she no longer tried to push it away. Buddhist teachings often speak of the beauty of sitting with discomfort, of allowing ourselves to be with what is, instead of running toward what might be. Sarah breathed in slowly, felt the rise and fall of her chest, felt the warmth of the cup against her palm. She began to whisper quietly, almost without knowing, "I'm here. I'm still here." It was not a grand revelation. It was not a moment of fireworks or enlightenment. It was just her, sitting quietly in the soft dark, learning how to befriend herself. The days that followed became a practice. Sarah began to take walks in the morning, feeling the cool air on her face, watching the world wake up. She stopped checking her phone first thing when she opened her eyes. She allowed herself moments of stillness without guilt. At work, she still cared for others. still offered her steady presence to patients and friends. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer needed their approval to feel worthy. She no longer needed their gratitude to feel whole. She gave because she wanted to, not because she had to. One afternoon, as she was leaving work, a coworker stopped her in the hallway. "Sarah, you're different lately. You seem calmer, lighter." "What's your secret?" Sarah smiled softly, her fingers brushing against the small stone pendant she now wore around her neck, a quiet reminder to herself. "I stopped waiting for someone to save me," she said gently. "I started sitting with myself." The coworker gave a puzzled laugh, but Sarah just smiled, nodded, and walked away. That evening, back in her apartment, Sarah made a cup of tea, placed the cracked teacup on the table, and sat by the window. She watched the sunset spill color across the sky. She listened to the hush of the city below, and she whispered again, "Thank you, not to the world, not to anyone outside, but to herself." To the woman who had learned at last that the journey to healing was not about filling the room. It was about filling her own heart. And in that quiet, Sarah felt something she had been chasing for years without even knowing its name. Freedom! Not freedom from longing, but freedom within longing. Not freedom from pain, but freedom within pain. Not freedom from life, but freedom within life. The cracked teacup sat quietly beside her, not waiting to be repaired, not waiting to be made perfect, simply existing as it was, whole in its own way. And Sarah too sat quietly, whole in hers. Winter arrived quietly. The city slowed, wrapped in cold air and early darkness. Sarah found herself walking home from the hospital under streetlights, her breath visible in the frosty air, the hush of winter softening the usual noise of traffic and voices. Something about this season made her even more aware of the quiet inside her life. But now, it was not an enemy. It was a companion. One night, Sarah sat by her window, a blanket over her shoulders, watching snow fall under the dim glow of the lamppost outside. The world had fallen silent in that magical way it sometimes does, when the snow absorbs sound, and all that's left is a kind of sacred stillness. In her hands, the cracked teacup was warm with tea. She turned it slowly, fingers resting on the line of the crack, and let her mind drift. For years, she had run from this kind of moment. She had believed that if she just filled her time with people, noise, and plans, she could outrun the feeling of incompleteness inside. But tonight, as the snow fell and the city slept, Sarah felt something inside her settle. Buddhist teachings speak of the middle way, the path between extremes, not grasping, not pushing away, not drowning in desire, not rejecting life, simply being here with what is. Sarah realized she had spent much of her life swinging between those extremes, longing for love, pulling away when it arrived, craving connection, then fearing vulnerability. But here, in this simple moment, she sat in the middle. She no longer needed to be rescued. She no longer needed to be perfect before she could feel peace. She thought of the patients she worked with every day, their fragility, their strength, their stories. She thought of how often they reached for her hand in the quiet of a hospital room, not asking for answers, just presence. And it struck her, softly but deeply, that this was all she had ever wanted from herself. Presence, not judgment, not fixing, not endless improvement, just presence. Her fingers traced the crack in the teacup again, and she felt a small, grateful smile rise. The crack was no longer where the cup was broken. It was where it had been tested, where it had survived. So too with her own heart. The next day, Sarah walked through the city, bundled in her coat, feeling the cold bite at her cheeks. She noticed things she had once rushed past. The sound of birds in bare trees, the steam rising from street vents, the way strangers' faces softened when they caught her eye, and she smiled. Healing, she realized, was not a destination she was walking toward. It was a practice she was living inside, a practice of noticing, a practice of softening, a practice of showing up for her own life over and over again. That evening, Sarah called her sister, a woman she hadn't spoken to in months. No agenda, no apology, just connection. They talked for an hour, laughter bubbling up between them, small stories shared, warmth flowing back into a relationship that had cooled. Sarah hung up, leaned back on her couch, and felt the unmistakable glow of peace, not because everything was fixed, not because the past had been erased, but because she had shown up to herself, to her sister, to the moment. Buddhist wisdom says, when we stop searching for perfect conditions, we discover the joy of this very breath. Sarah closed her eyes and felt the rise and fall of her chest. This is enough, she thought. And in that simple sentence, she found more freedom than she had ever known in all the years of striving, all the years of longing. Later that night, as the snow deepened and the city quieted once more, Sarah placed the teacup carefully on her shelf. She whispered again, softly, "Thank you. Thank you to the journey. Thank you to the ache that became a doorway. Thank you to the cracks that let her finally come home to herself." The world outside remained the same, imperfect, unpredictable, unfinished. But inside, Sarah had found something unshakable. Not the end of longing, not the end of loneliness, but a peace deep enough to hold them both. The days began to lengthen. Winter softened its hold, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the city stirred toward spring. Sarah felt it first in the air. A faint, almost shy promise that the cold was loosening. She noticed it in the way sunlight lingered a little longer on the buildings as she walked home. Inside her, something was shifting too. For the first time in years, she felt a curiosity awaken, a gentle pull not of need, but of openness. She no longer sought people to fill a void, but she found herself noticing them more deeply. The barista who remembered her name and her usual order. The elderly neighbor who smiled from his window every morning. The cow worker who shared a quiet moment of laughter over a misplaced chart. These connections were not big, dramatic relationships. They were threads, soft, golden, almost invisible, weaving her back into the world without demanding she abandon herself. Buddhist wisdom teaches that when we make peace with ourselves, we become available to the world, not from emptiness, but from wholeness. Sarah walked through the city and let herself be touched by the world, not consumed by it, not dependent on it, just touched. One Saturday morning, Sarah went to the farmer's market, something she hadn't done in years. She wandered through stalls of bright vegetables, fragrant flowers, handmade bread. The chatter of vendors and customers wrapped around her like a soft coat, comforting but not necessary. She paused at a stall where a woman sold delicate pottery. Her eye caught on a small bowl, pale blue, fine cracks running through the glaze, a pattern called kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The cracks were not hidden. They were illuminated, honored, made beautiful. Sarah ran her fingers lightly over the golden lines, her heart catching in her throat. This is what healing looks like, she thought. Not hiding the cracks, not erasing the past, but turning the broken places into art. She bought the bowl and carried it home carefully, as if cradling something sacred. That evening, she placed the kintsugi bowl next to her grandmother's cracked teacup on the shelf. The two pieces stood together, one old, one new, both whole in their own way. Sarah stepped back and felt something shift in her chest, a loosening, a widening, a quiet, deep knowing. She was no longer waiting for someone to complete her. She was no longer waiting for someone to complete her. She was no longer postponing her peace for a future moment, a future love, a future version of herself. She had become the home she always sought. The next day, Sarah met a friend for coffee, not because she was lonely, not because she needed to be distracted, but because she wanted to share her presence, her warmth, her listening heart. And something remarkable happened. She laughed more easily. She listened without needing to fix. She received her friend's stories with open hands, not grasping, not judging, just holding space. Her friend noticed. "You seem lighter," she said with a soft smile. Sarah smiled back, a quiet glow in her eyes. "I think I'm just learning how to sit with myself," she said. "And it's changing everything." Buddhist teachings remind us that the heart, once open, becomes the greatest gift we can offer to the world. Not because it is perfect, not because it is healed beyond hurt, but because it is real, present, softened by life, not hardened by it. As spring bloomed, Sarah walked through the world differently. She no longer counted her worth in invitations or phone calls. She no longer measured her days by how much attention she received. She measured them in presence, in moments of noticing, in the quiet, steady rhythm of her own breath. And in that rhythm, she discovered a peace that surprised her over and over again. One evening she sat by her window, the cracked teacup and the golden bowl side by side, watching the sunset paint the city in soft light. She breathed in, breathed out, whispered again, "Thank you," to the ache that taught her how to soften, to the solitude that taught her how to stay, to the journey that brought her home to herself. And as the evening deepened, Sarah understood a truth she had only glimpsed before: that healing without needing anyone does not mean you walk alone. It means you walk whole. And from that wholeness, every step becomes a quiet offering of love. The days continued to unfold in their quiet, ordinary rhythm. Morning light through the window, the soft rustle of leaves outside, the scent of coffee in the kitchen. Sarah moved through her life with a kind of stillness now. Not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of someone who had stopped running. One evening, as the sky turned that particular shade of twilight blue, Sarah stepped onto her small balcony. Below, the city moved on. People walking home from work, couples laughing on street corners, bicycles weaving through traffic. The world carried on, as it always had, as it always would. But inside Sarah, the landscape had changed. She leaned against the railing, the cool air brushing her cheeks, and closed her eyes. For a long moment, she simply breathed. No fixing, no improving, no striving, just being. Buddhist wisdom teaches that peace is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of spaciousness within it. Sarah had come to understand this not through books, not through grand declarations, but through the quiet art of sitting with herself. She no longer reached for her phone the moment a wave of longing arose. She no longer counted herself incomplete when a night passed without plans. She no longer measured her value by who stayed or who left. Instead, she became a soft landing place for herself. That night, Sarah sat once again by her window, the cracked teacup and the golden kintsugi bowl side by side on the shelf. She traced the lines of gold and porcelain with her eyes and felt a deep, settling breath move through her body. She whispered, barely audible, "I am enough." Not because she was perfect, not because she no longer hurt, but because she had learned the art of staying. Staying with the ache until it softened. Staying with the joy without grasping. Staying with the moment however it arrived, however it passed. Outside, the city lights flickered on, one by one, like stars rising from the pavement. Sarah watched, heart open, hands resting loosely in her lap, and felt the quiet pulse of life move through her. Buddhist wisdom says, when you make peace with yourself, you make peace with the world. Sarah understood now that the world would never stop changing. People would come and go. Love would rise and fall. Moments of sweetness would give way to moments of ache. But beneath it all, there was a place inside her that could remain. A place of quiet, a place of presence, a place of peace. And from that place, everything else became a gift. Not a solution, not a cure. A gift, the laughter of a friend, the warmth of sunlight, the softness of an ordinary day. Sarah placed her hand gently over her heart and let her eyes close. "Thank you," she whispered again, "to the cracks, to the gold, to the long, beautiful road home." And as the night deepened and the stars carved their soft light across the sky, Sarah rested in the kind of wholeness she had never known was possible. The wholeness that comes, not from needing anyone, but from finally belonging to herself. Maybe tonight, as you sit quietly in your own space, you will remember this, that healing is not about erasing your loneliness. It is about learning to sit beside it, to soften, to breathe, to stay. Buddhist wisdom reminds us you are already enough. The journey home is not out there, it's here, inside you. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to Lotus Light Teachings together. Let's keep walking this path of quiet healing and deep wisdom. Until next time, may you rest. Until next time, may you rest gently inside your own hearts.